Hello, you are welcome to the other side. In the last 1 week, Africa, particularly Cameroon and Tanzania, have been engulfed in serious political violence that has led to the death in Tanzania, over 700 people. In Cameroon, presently no estimation of the number of people that have been killed, nor do we really know the course of events and how they will pan out. My name is Rimamnde Shawulu. This is the other side. On the 27th of October 2025, official announcement of the elections that took place in Cameroon, and President Paul Biya, who took over from Ahmadou Ahidjo, won the elections according to the electoral empire. He was opposed by Issa T. Chiroma Bakari of the opposition party. And as at that day, at least 4 people were killed in Douala. And of course, the following day, protests broke out in several more cities where several people were killed. And as happens always with African leaders, there was immediate restriction on availability of the internet. And then protests continued the following day and have continued up to date. Many people have been killed. And of course, the international multilateral organizations, as usual, have issued several warnings about deaths and hate speech. And then just about the same time in Tanzania, there was a general election. The current president, Suluhu Hassan, took over as president after the president of the country died. Of course, violence has also followed. And as at today, the opposition is saying that as many as 700 people may have been killed. Military have been deployed. They have been positioned coffee in the country. We've had internet as usual cut because the government usually believes that if they cut internet access, protesters may not know how to communicate with one another. There have been several deaths and reported widespread violence across the country. Again, in Africa, we are unable to manage elections. Of course, this is not the first time it has happened. The electoral violence has been happening, and political scientists have estimated that most of the violence in Africa are related to struggles for power and mismanagement of the electoral system. Let's take a look at some of the historical violence that have followed mismanaged electoral processes. We start with our country, Nigeria. Between 1964 and 1965, we had serious political violence in the southwestern Nigeria, and the violence led to the legitimization of the government and may have precipitated the coup that took place to overthrow the government. Of course, between 1979 and 83, we had serious political violence, so much violence that the governor, who reportedly won elections in one of the states in the southwest, had to be spirited out of the state in order to leave. And since then, we've had several other protests. We had, in particular, the post-election violence in Nigeria in 2011, in which President Goodluck Jonathan defeated the candidate of the CPC, Muhammadu Buhari. Over 800 people were killed. There were judicial affirmation of the results of the elections, and that did not stop the violence that took place. Since then, we've had different types of violence at different levels during elections. In the last election, where ballot papers were snatched, people were driven away from polling stations, allegations of massive electoral offenses committed by various people, and of course, the cases that went up for judicial interpretation and redress ended up being thrown out almost completely, and the court upheld the victories of the people that won the election, in spite of the pictures that came out of several states that showed that there were widespread violence. Côte d'Ivoire has been a regular scene of election violence. We've had election street battles in that country. We had the civil war and threats of civil war in that country. In Liberia, we've had similar things happen that resulted in a civil war. Similar thing happened in Sierra Leone. And if you go all through our history, you will see that this violence over elections have been the hallmark of election processes in Africa. And if we go over to East Africa in 1992 and 1997, we had multi-party elections that took place, and several ethnic clashes and killings of people, serious post-election crisis. In Ethiopia in 2005, protests over elections, several people, of course, were killed and the opposition was curtailed. In 2016, we had the same types of protests and emergency was declared. Uganda, of course, has had different cycles of elections, had Yoweri Museveni, a rebel leader that became president, who has continued to win the election, and opposition have virtually been silenced in that country. Almost all the elections that have taken place 2001, 2006, 2011, 2016, and 2021, almost a permanent leader, you may say, of that country. And needless to mention the crisis that we had in the Democratic Republic of Congo that have resulted into changes of government, rebellion, destruction. We had the same thing in Congo, Brazzaville. We had the same thing in Gabon, where we have post-election violence and so forth. Central African Republic has had the same problem of post-election violence and the inability of the leaders to manage election processes, to come to a situation where elections will become normal, as it happens in European countries where people win elections, you don't have violence, people trust the process. Still in Zimbabwe, we've had violence as a result of elections. Violence in Mozambique, Angola had the same problem. Zambia too has had the same problem. Egypt in North Africa also had the same problem. Protesters protesting elections. We had military takeover and so forth. And of course, Libya is still going through problems, unable to harmonize leadership, and so much tension in that country. Of course, Sudan, the crisis in the politics has led to a civil war that has killed many more people than even the war in Gaza between Israel and the Hamas. And so these problems continue to plague Africa. Most of the fatality in Africa, including some of the so-called ethnic and religious wars, may actually be political conflicts on inability of the political elites, if there are elites in Africa, to be able to organize elections in a transparent process that will have smooth change of leadership. This has resulted into violence, and political scientists and people who keep statistics actually have come out with the statistics to show that most of the killings, most of the violence in Africa are related to politics. Even some of the terrorist attacks in parts of Africa have their roots in political disagreement. And the common triggers, of course, are the disputed election results, the refusal to accept term limits, exclusion of candidates. And the funny thing is that President Suluhu, who replaced the late president in Tanzania, is reported to have banned her opponents and stopped them from contesting the elections. We have the security forces, including the judicial forces, being partisan in their outlook. And we have a situation where the winner takes all, and the courts are weak. The police is not strong enough, does not act independently. And then you have a situation where the economies are actually in their distress, resulting in huge numbers of unemployed youths and even unemployable youths who are always available for whoever, including government agents, to get them to do their bidding. Of course, we had some mitigation process like what happened in Kenya in 2008, where there was power sharing. The same thing in Zimbabwe in 2009. And in some other countries like in Mali, the result of disputed elections have been military coups. The same thing happened in Gabon. These outcomes may not actually be what people may be looking for. Of course, the resort to banning the internet in those countries is not actually a new strategy. It's been undertaken by the Taliban in Afghanistan. It's been done by the Shia dictators in Iran. But Stopping people from organizing actually does not stop protest. As it happened in the Soviet Union, if these issues are not addressed and people come to understanding, whatever happens, whenever those things are lifted, you have a situation where people will come back with those same sentiments and issues that made them to want to protest in the first place. And that, of course, is the reason why immediately we have a lift in the stoppage of flow of information in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union broke into pieces because there were pent-up anger, pent-up resentments that were not addressed, and people simply waited for the opportunities. So stopping people from talking does not actually stop anything. But of course, the question too is that there have been instances where people like President Goodluck Jonathan engaged in a process of allowing people to talk, allowing proper elections to be conducted. And the result of it is that the people that were struggling for power by all means decided to use the openings that he has created to throw him out of power. And so the questions that leaders will have to keep asking themselves is, what do we do? Where do we strike the balance? As it is now, the violence that is taking place in Cameroon, that is taking place in Tanzania, may only widen and increase and move to other parts of Africa. This is because it does appear from history that Africans like copying one another. Once there was a coup in one country, it did not take long for coups to take place in other countries. Once people have protested against elections in one part of the country, it does appear that those protests will spread to other areas, especially where people believe that the electoral system was not transparent and has not been fair. Let me have your take about what is happening in Africa, the protests in Tanzania and the protests in Cameroon. Should African leaders continue to ban the internet to stop people from communicating because they are protesting? When will African leaders have credible elections that will be seen by people within and outside Africa as credible? My name is Rimamnde Shawulu. This is The Other Side.